start. Honor your guys' time for being here. We're going to talk about older homes. I like this presentation better than the last one, although the last one has lots of good information in it. This one is fun because Denver has a lot of older homes, right? Maybe not as old as some places back east and such, but there's a lot of older homes. And we have a ton of people moving here, and some of them really lean towards older homes. That'll be part of our discussion today as well. All right, before we go on, here's an older house. Very cute. We see this house all over Denver, right? These little bungalows everywhere. There's two things that are relatively obvious for an inspector. Can you tell me two things that might be kind of going on with this house?
I can't tell if it's like sloping or if I'm just...
We call this the frowning bungalow. It's probably not as much the house as it is the porch, right? These porches all the time. Drainage isn't very good over here, and so we get this little bit of sagging on either side. Great job. There's another one that's fairly obvious. It's kind of up.
Chimney?
Yeah.
Oh.
Chimmy's kind of got a little hook going up there. Really pretty common, and sometimes they fall completely over. So.
That's the tallest chimney I think
That's
I've seen.
That's a tall brick chimney, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very susceptible to what's happening to it right now. So we're going to look at a lot of those kinds of things on older homes as far as not just the structure, but also a lot of the systems on the inside. So we did this first time. You're our only new person. We'll introduce ourselves again, just so we've done that. Instead of telling us about how long you've been in real estate or whatever, this time, just tell me one fun thing that you've, like super fun thing you've done in the last 6 months. Okay? All right. Let's just think about that for a second. I'll model it since I'm an educator. My name's Robert Lopez. You notice my name is not Scott Lunsford. People call me Scott all the time because Scott spends a lot of time in Florida ever since he hired me. And the super fun thing that I did in the last few months is my wife and I got to go away for 10 days, which we haven't done since our honeymoon 30
Oh my
years,
gosh.
almost 34 years ago. Just the two of us in Hawaii. If you ever get a chance to fly in a helicopter with the door open and get next to it, do it. It's really, really cool. It's a little chilly, but it's really, really cool. That's my fun thing in the last
So were you
few
in
months.
Hawaii then?
What's that?
Were you in Hawaii?
We didn't do Kauai. We actually did Oahu and Maui. We
Okay.
kind of specifically went to Maui to try to be supportive because their economy is in the tank at the moment after the fire and all. But and we missed out on a few things because of that. But we felt really. I mean, at the whale watch tour we went on, the guy was talking. He says, "Yeah, we're just barely hanging on. We're about 50% of our normal capacity." So yeah, so that felt good. And we saw a ton of whales, and it was very, very nice. Tell us something funny you're doing. And your name.
So Crystal, and similarly trip-esque, but I just did my first yoga retreat because I love yoga. And so that was like out near Moab and getting to do some of the arch hikes in conjunction with yoga stuff. It was just really cool.
Trying to think of which thing that's it. I don't know. I guess I did Kelsey, Daytona, and I did get to go to South Dakota with my great aunt, see her brother. She wanted to go visit him. That was a very fun trip. I didn't know South Dakota was so pretty. They're really holding out. That's like a secret they're keeping from everybody. It's really gorgeous.
I've been back and forth to Montana a bunch because my son went to school up in Bozeman, but we haven't been to South Dakota, and we really want to do that sometime soon. Yeah.
Is that the Black Hills?
Black Hills, Mount Rushmore, all that
Yeah,
stuff.
I mean, yeah, we were just between literally Pierre and, what's the name of it? No, where you fly into? I guess it's. I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank on the airport, but yeah, it was just between, it's like a 2-hour drive from the airport to here, and so it's kind of that area.
Cool.
Yeah.
My name's Bailey. We were out in November in Florida. For a business trip, we didn't do Orlando or any of that in our spare time, but we did kayaking inland in the swamp areas. And it was probably 8 miles. Kayaking on it was a little too cold for them.
Okay.
It's hot out and it's sunny, so we only saw 2. You see a lot more if it's sunny out. But it's beautiful. King's Landing, if you ever want to go kayaking in them. But the first section is just crystal clear blue water, and then you get into the darker, slow waters where the alligators are, and that's the longer section. But we did the whole thing. It was
Fun.
cool.
That's really cool.
That's sweet. I'm Caroline. I went to the Netherlands and went out to like the countryside of Amsterdam to ride my favorite breed of horse, which is a Friesian. It's like those big black ones with the
Yeah.
mermaid hair.
Cool.
Yeah, it was so awesome.
That's awesome.
They're from there.
Uh-huh.
They're from an island called Friesland. So I got to go and like experience that.
Cool, that's really
That's
cool.
cool.
Mermaid hair? It's just like
You know a Friesian?
It's like a wavy. Yeah.
I'll Jason go.
Naturally, it's gorgeous.
I'll get a
yeah.
photo.
I'm Jason Schmidt, and does holding an open house count?
Sure.
No, because that's all I've done in the last 6 months.
Just keep doing open houses.
Yeah, I played on stage on Saturday night on 420, and played out with a whole bunch of musicians.
What do you play?
I play drums. I'm playing out tonight too, so.
I
I'll put tonight as.
I knew you were in trouble with drummers. That's awesome. That's very fun.
I'm Jackie, and probably my ski trip to Big Sky. Got married out there 2 years ago, but I had never skied Big Sky, so it was awesome.
Good. That's near Bozeman. Okay, very cool. Very nice. All right. So I'm Robert Lopez. This is for you. I'm going to keep it short, right? I'm a retired principal. Used to be a science teacher. Scott's my neighbor. Talking about doing this in retirement. So when I retired almost 6 years ago, I actually started working for him part-time and seasonally before that, but then I've been doing this full-time ever since I retired. It's a great gig. And this is one of the more fun things that I get to do is actually get to come out and use some of my teaching and principal skills with folks and talk about some fun things. I'm hoping that the CD is a little more fun and interesting than title, but maybe the title's fun. I don't know. I haven't sat through a title CD. So that's kind of who I am. Our team, just really quickly, Scott DeMille, he's been running this for coming up on 25 years this May. You have to be good at something if you're going to stay in business for 25 years. Our team is super experienced over all kinds of different careers before they landed with us. The exception to that is Jay. He's super experienced with home inspections because he was Scott's first employee. After 1 year operating as a one-man show, he hired his brother-in-law, who is Jay, and Jay's been doing this for virtually 25 years as well. We've done 30,000 inspections. We can get you in quickly because we have capacity. We do sewers, molds, we do it all. One-stop shopping. You don't have to call anybody else. If you need asbestos or lead-based paint, we can refer you for that. Pretty much everything else we can do for you. And they're great guys. We really work with them. We don't hire people based on their knowledge of homes. That certainly helps to have a really good background. Just as a homeowner, I've always done most of my repairs and such. So I've learned a lot. And Scott knew that about me when he hired me. Lots of these guys do have some industry background, but some of them are retired teachers just like me. But what they all do is this, what I'm doing right now, right, is they are very capable of talking to your client, not making them scared, but just talking to them, communicating with them, being personable with them. So we really invest in our guys as far as client intergovernmental relations. We just want to make sure that's a great experience for your clients. So that's us. We'll jump into our content. We want to learn about old homes. What are some of the characteristics? We want to help your clients to know what to expect from an older home. So if we're the people that are doing your inspection, we're going to help in that. But we're also trying to help you know more about that so that you can serve your clients. We're going to talk about what to expect from older homes. Or kind of all the general things that happen with older homes. Old systems, energy efficiency, some of the environmental issues like I just spoke about with asbestos, lead, those kind of things that can pop up. And also we talk about homes with character. I live in Arvada, just south of Stanley Lake, and so Old Town, when I was a kid, like the actual actual Old Town, if you've been to Old Town around, was nobody in there. It was terrible. There was like an old stationery shop that was there that if you needed something real specific, it was a great place to go. There was the Rhinelander Bakery's been there forever. You might go down there for that. I grew up Catholic, went to St. Anne's, went to church down there. But other than that, you basically didn't go to Old Town. There was hardly anything really open or worthwhile down there. So now it's vibrant, right? It's where everybody wants to live. The prices have gone through the roof. And I have a bunch of pictures that are kind of around Old Town that are kind of fun to look at and talk about. So what to expect? You know, you've got what's going to happen when you buy this old home, and why would you buy an old home in the first place? What kind of upgrades might you want to make, and you know, what's normal, right? I mean, everybody asks me when you're doing an inspection, is that normal? It's not. It might not be normal. It might not be ideal, but it's probably typical, right? It happens a lot, whatever it is, moving concrete, some structural issues, cracking in the brickwork, that kind of stuff. So does it need attention? Probably, yeah. Is it normal? We don't want it to stay that way, but it's pretty typical, right? It's a normal thing to happen, even though we don't want to necessarily leave it that way. So normal maintenance cycles, we talked already a lot about this particular group of things and how things last when we were talking about the new houses. Old houses, obviously things cycle in the same amount. We don't find too many old houses that have original systems. We do find some, and we'll show you some of those pictures. They're kind of interesting. That have some original wiring, original HVACs, some interesting things going on inside of them. And just what does it take to care for an older home? We certainly want to talk to you and your clients about that a little bit. So I update these every couple of years. I need to update this one again, right? Because you're probably not going to find a lot of homes for $450,000. When I first started doing these, I think that number was $250,000, and so I bumped it up. I need to bump it up to more like $650,000 because even that's kind of a low end for homes, right? For an actual house as opposed to a condo. My son, who bought his first home 2 years ago, I think, right out of college, stayed with us for just a little bit, made some money. He's an engineer. Bought a condo for like $330. It's like 1,100 square feet, 2 bedrooms. I'm like, holy moly. Our first house was $72,000. And it was, 3 bedrooms, bi-level, 1,700 square feet, something like that.
Will we get these slides?
I'm sorry?
Will we get these?
You won't get these slides, but I think she turned that on. We were supposed to be recording.
Yes.
So you could probably ask her. Yeah, up front. So typically, this just gives me an example. About 1% is what we tell people to put aside. Nobody does that, right? I mean, for maintenance, it's a lot of money. But things come up when you own a home, whether it's a newer home or an older home. And we actually kind of increase that for older homes. We're like, I want to put away a little more than that because things are expensive, especially now, to fix and update. So there's some examples here. Again, I need to update some of these numbers. And actually, one thing I would mention to you is in all of our inspections, we provide this cost guide, and it kind of gives your clients a general ballpark about how much flooring is and how much it is to replace plumbing and all kinds of things in the home. And this one is out of date. I got these probably 2 years ago from Pillar to Post. But the ones that are in your client's information have just been updated, so it's really nice since inflation has gone through the roof kind of post-COVID. And so those are much more up to date as far as the costs go. And it's a nice little tool for you and your clients to have. But this is basically just saying it can be really expensive, and it can be really expensive if you have to do a couple things together. So really trying to get a cycle of maintenance. Like if your furnace is 20 years old, you might think, all right, I'm going to get that done next year because I know it's going to be a chunk of money, so I'm going to save up some money towards it. I have to finance some of it, whatever. But I'm going to get that done before it goes out, right? Before it goes out, and then at the same time, oh my gosh, my gutters are falling off my house. If you can try to actually stay on top of things before they become a major problem, and save some money towards it, it really works out better for you financially as far as planning goes. So deferred maintenance is what we see a lot of, though, right? Where people just keep kind of putting things off and putting things off, especially paint. And the problem with putting off paint on the outside is that all of a sudden you have a big expense because now you're replacing pieces of the siding, or maybe all the siding, I did an inspection at a townhouse, right? So it's all covered by, it was a big townhouse complex and condo complex, and they hadn't done the siding, they hadn't done any paint, there was rot everywhere. I know, and I told them, I said, I know that the HOA is responsible for this, but what you need to realize is you might have a big assessment, right? You might have a big assessment come up because they're gonna have to replace a lot of the siding. They can't just have a painter come out and fix it. So I'm not trying to scare people, but again, just kind of give them a heads up. This is gonna have to be fixed, and it's gonna be expensive when you finally fix it, and it might come up in, you know, how much you have to pay in HOA. So deferred maintenance, we see a lot of obsolete systems in old homes that need to be replaced. There might be safety kinds of issues, or it might just not be up to date enough to handle the way we use homes today, right? Electrical, for example. If you have all the original electrical in a home, what are all in an older home? What are all of your outlets look like? Just 2 holes, right? Not 3. That's going to be hard for a lot of things to plug into, and they're not grounded. So you see that we call this deferred maintenance when things just kind of become obsolete and no one ever kind of fixes them, and it takes a while to get caught up. So again, we said this about new homes. No home is perfect. You're going to need to save some money in order to do some maintenance, unless you like paying interest on financing.
Did you go like a few slides back? There was a slide that had like the conventional furnace last 20 years.
Sure.
Before this
I'm
one.
sorry, we talked about that in the last one a little bit, but let's go back and talk about
Okay,
that.
Steve.
Yeah, so an older conventional furnace is pretty simple, but they're obsolete now. They don't make conventional furnaces where it's just one set of heat exchangers. You either get a medium efficiency or high efficiency nowadays, depending on kind of what your needs are. The high efficiency ones are a lot more complicated, and they also create condensation both in heating and cooling, so they're much more susceptible to getting rusty if that condensation starts to leak and nobody happens to notice it. So that's why that's a little bit shorter for the high efficiency. But these old conventional ones are the ones we see in old homes, and sometimes they're still hanging around because they last longer. But when we talk about, again, really old homes, we're going to see some really interesting older heating systems as we go along.
When did they stop using the conventional ones?
Oh, we just got that with you. So I wasn't watching. Probably not that long ago, probably 15, 20 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah. Jason, we were asking about what's an easy way to spot high efficiency furnaces. Do you see the high efficiency furnace exhaust on this house?
Above the chimney?
It's on the chimney, right? They use the chimney to do it. And so you have these 2 plastic tubes coming out. That's the key thing you'll notice on the outside of a home is 2 plastic tubings. One is air that's being injected into the system, combustion air, and the other is the exhaust coming out. Sometimes it'll come out the side of the house. In this case, wherever their furnace was placed, it was convenient to send it up the chimney and out that direction. So right there, high efficiency furnace. You know this house at least has had an updated furnace at some point. Obviously not the original home. So why would you buy an older home?
Location.
Location, right? Location for sure. It's become very popular for lots of people to live more urban rather than suburban, right? So location is a huge one, right? Every time I watch something on HGTV, right, they're always talking about, well, I want to live near downtown. I want to live within walking distance of whatever it is. And that's generally what, you know, the suburbs aren't within walking distance of a lot of things, right? I mean, some suburbs are doing better about building some little town centers in their developments. I happen to find that near me. There's some restaurants and some shops and some businesses there. But lots of times, right, you have to get a car and go. And what else about it? What appeals to you about a home like this?
Character.
Right? All brick, right? The brick's got kind of a fun little pattern on it, just like kind of how older homes look. You might really like the gigantic trees, so it can cause you a lot of maintenance issues, but right, some mature landscaping. Yeah. Lots of things attract people to older homes. A lot of character in that home. We got the chimneys braced on this one, so they're not falling over yet. Anybody knows maybe a safety issue on this one?
Yeah.
The balcony railing?
Yeah, right. Not only could your dog or kid fit through the rails, they also, the rails ain't you. So they're not really gonna stop anybody. Obviously not modern standards as far as the railing goes on an older home. Very typical for any kind of older balconies that haven't been updated. This house is obviously in very original condition. You know, they may have maintained it well, but it haven't changed it much, right? And you'll see this in some places it's required. I've especially seen it kind of in that North Cherry Creek area where they want to scrape the house. They really want a new house, but they have to leave the facade. It's the wildest thing if you haven't seen it. Like the front of the house, literally the wall of the front of the house is just kind of propped up. And then everything behind it is gone, and they're digging a big basement out, and the foundation goes almost all the way to the back alley. It's just like, wow, that is amazing that they have to keep that same facade, but then they're putting a completely modern house on behind it. That would be a little difficult on that one, but. So yeah, old homes just have kind of fun character, right? And this has a little more modern paint job to it and all, but still very old in its character. It has the cool American flag on the front, some fun landscaping. That's again right there along, I think, Grand Road 57. As you approach Old Town, there's the water tower right behind it, you know, landscape.
Where is it?
In Old Town, Arvada, yeah. If you're from Arvada, you know where the water tower is. That's the old original water tower for the old city. All right, so we're going to talk about old systems. We're going to talk about energy efficiency. We're going to talk about some of the environmental hazards that you might find in an older home. And we're just going to look at some fun homes with character. So old systems, lots of obsolete systems in old homes, especially electrical and plumbing, the heating system. In really old homes probably has been replaced, but it might have been replaced in the 60s, right? I mean, if you have like a 1920s home, it might have several renditions of heating systems that have gone through it. So it's always interesting to see what has been done. But plumbing is often an issue because it's expensive, and as long as it's still sort of working, people kind of limp along with it. But especially with galvanized pipes, we're going to talk about that, become a real issue that needs to be replaced. So this one isn't, well, there's some interesting things that we see with the old heating systems, but they've often been replaced. I've noticed this weird thing on Redfin recently, maybe it's on some of the other platforms too, where it says, you know, the house was built in 1960, and then it's by comma, renovated, and then it says like 1970. I'm like, who cares if it was renovated in 1970? Why would that be a benefit to anyone? That's probably worse than it was in the 60s. As far as style. All right, so let's talk about obsolete electric, right? You may be inadequate for your needs, right? You might not have enough juice. Although it's interesting because we're trying to use less electricity and lots of things have become much more efficient. But a really old system might not have nearly enough outlets, right? Like if you're in a room this big in a 1960s home, let's say this is kind of like the living room over here, you might have 2 outlets in there, and that might be it, right? I mean,
It's the 2-prong.
yeah, it might be the 2-pronged ones, right? Or they put a 3-pronged one in, but the ground isn't actually attached to anything. They just did it so you could plug it in. We see that all the time. It might be difficult to get insurance if you've got really obsolete, both aluminum wiring and also this kind of wiring. Knob and tube. So this is the original kind of way that we wired a home back in the early 1900s and late 1800s. There's kind of a fabric. It's the insulator as opposed to like a vinyl around it. And yes, you're not going to get the slide, but feel free to take any pictures you like. Yeah. And so these are just the insulators that we hang them with, right? Support the wire with, and then would cruise on along. But this fabric starts to break down and expose the wires. It's just, you know, it obviously is not modern. We've got some lot more modern wiring down below. Very often we'll see a combination like this, and without doing a full electrical evaluation, we're not necessarily able to tell you what's been abandoned, it's not in use anymore, and what's live. So there still could be a combination, even though we see the modern wiring here, there still could be some of the novelty that's in use, and so we've always recommend an electrician to come out to a full evaluation. A little more modern knob and tube, but still knob and tube.
Is knob and tube, if it's like in good condition, meaning it's not like whatever, is it fine or?
Not really. It's pretty much obsolete at this point, too old. It's usually not in good condition. We often see it kind of breaking down. I think I got a really good picture here. So right here is this very modern dimmer, right? But when you pull it out, you kind of see what the issues are, right? And most of it's going to look this way, where the insulation part of it is fraying, and yeah, it's just not good. At least it's copper wiring, it's not aluminum. We'll talk a little bit more about aluminum.
So the electricians just pull the copper line out of the insulating and hook it up and.
Yeah, I mean, this way, even if it was a new wiring, right, you strip the insulation off it to hook it, the actual conductor, the copper wiring on. So, but it's just, yeah, you can see it's just kind of coming apart. It's very susceptible to that, even along the line where it goes through some of those knobs and tubes, to just kind of fraying and exposing the conductive part. What's that?
Oh, electric meter?
That's a
Did you
panel.
say a laptop computer?
No, like the panel.
I'm kidding you. It's what?
It's the panel?
Yeah, it's the electrical panel. It's fuses. We still bump into these every now and then, right? You ever watch the Andy Griffith show, right? And, oh, the lights go out. I gotta go check the fuse panel, right? These are fuses. And what a fuse was what a breaker was before we had breakers, right? And so a fuse has a thin piece of metal going through it that can only take so much heat. And so when a circuit gets overloaded, it breaks. And that's the safety feature, right? So now I have to go and replace the fuse with a new one and hopefully not draw as much electricity out. When the fuse blows, that's what it was. So this is an old school breaker box, all right? It's a fuse box. We still bump into these occasionally. Usually there's a panel, but some places still have a fuse box that is still operational. So the meter, right, going straight in to there, providing the electricity to the fuse box before it goes out to the rest of the house. So it's an old breaker box, but not breakers, fuses.
What does uncapped wires mean?
What's that?
What does uncapped wires mean?
Uncapped?
Yeah, I got that in the inspection.
Sure. So wires that are spliced should have an end cap on them.
A little plastic.
A little plastic wired up, right? So there might have been some exposed wire. But then the other thing we see those splices, they should also be behind something. They should be inside of a box. And then with a plate over top of it. Lots of times we see those just kind of hanging out all over the place. You know, if it's up in an attic or something, it's probably not a huge deal, but it's technically not right when we have exposed wiring and exposed slices outside of the junction box. It should be inside that junction box. It's actually closed up.
Okay, so I just had that. Like the electricians didn't quite put the cover on
Right.
the boxes in the
Yes.
attic.
Mm-hmm.
And then somebody else came in to do an installation quote, they're like, yeah, your electricians do.
Precisely.
Actually,
We see it all the time, especially in attics. So it should be fixed. We should.
yeah.
Sometimes they do it well, and we might have some pictures of it. Sometimes there's too many, and so they can't get it closed. They can't get the cover to go on it, so they just
So they
leave it.
just leave it.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
But they at least cap the ends of them. so
Then, yeah,
they can
yeah,
get it.
yeah.
It's like,
But they're supposed to enclose, cover
Yeah.
it a little bit.
I don't see too many uncapped splices because those are probably going to come apart at some point. But we see open junction boxes all the time with the splices exposed. We'll probably see some in some of these. All right. Anybody know what that is? First of all, what kind of house is this probably?
It's
Duplex.
condos.
Probably a duplex, right? It's got two boxes. Well, it just has one meter, which is kind of interesting, so I don't know how they're dividing up. And the funny thing is, these are more modern panels, but not modern, more modern.
Maybe they did an add-on?
Could be, that also could be.
Yeah.
But this is bad. Because both of these panels are panels that are known to have problems from like the 70s or 60s. This is a Federal Pacific panel, and this is what we call a Zinco panel, and both of these panels are susceptible to fire. So whoever this is our own picture, you know. We walk back there like, oh, you don't just have one bad box, you've got two bad panels, yeah. So some work that's gonna need to be done there. Both these panels, again, are
If
recognized
they
as
have
safety
those
issues.
If they have those panels, is there like an assumption you can make about what their wiring is in the house?
No.
Okay.
So the wiring is really easy actually for us for the most part. So from about 65 to 75 is the window where they use the aluminum that's a problem.
Okay.
Yep, 65 to 75. If we're outside of 75 or before 65, rarely do we find it. Maybe 64. There was some aluminum in my in-laws' house when we were selling it. We had to get it dealt with. And you don't have to replace it. We'll talk a little bit more about that, about the fixes for it.
You said 65 to 75 is the aluminum.
That's generally the window where they started using it because it's cheaper, and then they discovered it's a problem. And I'll talk a little bit more about what the problem is with aluminum here in just a little bit. But both these panels are no bueno. This is definitely no bueno. What is this person doing?
Asking for a fire.
Grounding it.
They weren't grounding it. That's kind of what it looks like, but they weren't grounding it.
They don't want it to flip.
They don't want it to trip, so
Yeah.
it's tripping. They've taken this safety device and made it not safe, right? They made it so it can't be safe. So it was tripping all the time, so there's a problem, and they're either overloading with what they're, plugging into the wall, and now we've tied it down so it can't trip anymore. So they're asking for a fire, exactly. It does look like you haven't grounded something, but it's just really holding the breaker on. This is, again, something, the crazy stuff that we find. Okay, so these are the main lines coming out of the panel. And a non-electrician who decided they need some electricity for something, who knows what, just decided to screw a wire right into the main. I don't even know how you do that exactly.
Yeah.
So you turn, if it is the generator, if it is actually what's going to the house, at least you can shut the power off and then do it. But yeah, that's asking for trouble. Sweet seas. All right, so let's talk. It's not in here. It's another electrical one that I do. But aluminum. The problem with aluminum is this, all right? And they didn't understand this when they started making aluminum wire. Now you'll see aluminum wire in homes, in modern homes, but it's braided, okay? So it's like a cable almost, and it's not as susceptible to this problem. So we'll see it all the time, especially even on higher gauge, like things that are going into dryers and ovens and such. And that aluminum is fine. It's the single strand aluminum that's the problem, all right? And it's a problem at the connection points, and that's where we luck out, all right? So when you run electrical, if you remember back to your science classes, there's some resistance, and that resistance comes off as heat, right? So when you run electrical, you get some heat going. And the more electricity you run through, the hotter it gets, right? So like if you're running two blow dryers on the same circuit, sometimes that'll trip it, and it's because it gets too hot. And that's what the breakers do, is they trip before it starts a fire. Well, aluminum has this nasty habit of expanding when it gets hot, more than copper does. So it expands. So it's at those connection points, right? At a switch, at a fixture, plug, where when it's getting used, it heats up, it expands a little bit, cools back down, not in use, expands a little bit. Well, it's at a connection point, right, where there's a screw that's holding on to it. Well, when it does that over time, it gets loose. Now I've created this space in there. So then what does electricity do when it's kind of loose and near another conductor?
Jumps.
It can jump, it can arc, right? So the electricity kind of flashing, and that's what causes fires, when you've got those loose connections of aluminum wire. So there's a fix where you don't have to necessarily pull all the aluminum, and it's called pigtailing. You have a class that shows more of this, but there's these funny little, they're purple now. You'll see them, and what it is the aluminum wire goes into this pigtail connection, and there's this special kind of ointment stuff that's inside of there that keeps it from having that expansion problem and that arcing problem. And then the exit for that is copper, and it connects to whatever the fixture is. So you have to pigtail basically everything. So about a third of the wiring in my in-laws' house was aluminum, and they had a Federal Pacific panel. And so before we sold their house, we had an electrician, who again is a friend of mine, and did a really nice job of placing the panel and dealing with all the pigtails issues that we needed. And that's more expensive than you think, because even if the pigtails, $8 or $15 or whatever it is, it's a lot of labor, right? Because I have to do it at every point, check it, is that one aluminum? No, it's not aluminum. That one, oh, okay, that one is aluminum, gotta install it. I gotta do that basically at every outlet, every fixture in the house, to try to really figure out and deal with all of it. So it's a lot of labor and time to get that done. So aluminum can be dealt with. That's a side note. Let's talk about old heating systems.
Can I ask?
Please.
I have aluminum wire come up on an inspection that my buyers were interested in. How could am I saying, hey, that's probably a fire hazard,
Yes.
and it's not a good thing to move forward on unless,
Have an electrician evaluate it and determine what's gonna take to deal with it.
okay.
Yeah, that's what we always say is, right, because we're not electricians, we're not plumbers. When we find an issue, we say, this is an issue, you should have a licensed plumbing contractor, a licensed electrician come out and further evaluate it, and that usually includes a price, right? This is
Yeah.
gonna take $1,400 to fix, this is gonna take $2,000 to.
And most buyers want things with safety issues resolved.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't have to, but, you know, most likely you're gonna.
And the pigtailing, can you explain that process really quick again? What that is?
Yeah, when you have a chance, look it up online, because there'll be
Sure.
pictures all over the place, but I'm happy to explain it. So, again, the problem is where it connects to things, it heats up, expands, and starts to
About
come
that,
loose.
yeah.
And so there's a mechanism you put in there, basically it's just two, there's a wire coming out of it that we're gonna connect to the fixture, right? That's gonna be my new connection to the fixture, and it's copper. And this little pigtail, you put the old aluminum wiring in there, and it has some sort of, like almost a gel material in there that can withstand and accommodate for that heating and that expansion, so it won't become loose again.
Great.
So then it's not a fire issue.
Thanks so much.
You bet. I love nothing more than interacting with you.
I
It's
think
so
that's
boring
why
when people
we
just sit there and don't ask any questions, so it's great for me. All right, so we're gonna talk about some old systems. Boilers are amazing, and they can last forever, but they do have some issues. And we're gonna see a really fun octopus furnace. If you haven't seen one before, you're in for a treat. All right, so here's a boiler that was still trucking along, still making hot water for hot water heat, baseboard heat. It's really old. What else is it?
Rusty.
It's a little rusty, there's some issues with it.
Is it cold? And is.
There's also another problem. What's all that white stuff, most likely?
Asbestos.
Yeah. Yep. Anything that's this old that has something white on it, we always write up as, this is possibly asbestos. We can't know without testing it, but it's probably asbestos. An install from that age is certainly gonna be asbestos. You don't know that for sure without testing it. And asbestos is not the worst thing, as long as you don't disturb it, right? It's when it's what they call friable, when it's starting to come apart. If you penetrate it, like if you have walls and you start digging into it, now you've exposed yourself to it and the atmosphere to it. A terrible story about one of my teachers. They bought a townhouse that was, I think, from the early 70s. Her husband was home. They decided to redo some floors. They were scraping up some tile and linoleum, and it's like an early 1970s. He gets about halfway through and is like, I should have got this checked for asbestos. And sure enough, they contaminated it. You know, they got a little baby and contaminated the whole townhouse. So they had to move out for a couple of weeks while they got it abated and cleaned up. Yeah. So it is definitely something, anytime from about 78 earlier, you want to be careful if you're doing renovations and checking where you're pulling out old materials that they could have asbestos. Can be dealt with, but you do definitely want to be careful because you can spread it all over. And it is very, very bad for you.
So before 78, but is there like a time when it started, or would like my 1891 home have?
So that's a great question. The problem is, even if you're anything, something could have been installed down the line, right? If it's not original material. So I don't know when they started using asbestos as
Okay.
specific materials, and probably for a long time before it's
Yeah, we
I'm sure that
had,
they
we had
know.
to get our plaster and like all of our walls checked, and luckily it didn't have it, so I was
Yeah.
just curious if there's
Yeah.
like
A start time.
Yeah.
So this is a similar boiler, maybe even the same boiler, not the exact same one, but the same model, with all that insulation removed, right? So probably not as efficient anymore, but not with asbestos hanging out all over the place. And like I said, some of these we will find in good working condition, especially if you maintain your boiler. They have much longer lifespans than a furnace does. When we walk up on a 35-year-old boiler, we're certainly going to tell you to get it checked by a boiler guy, and we'll usually find a leak here, you know, a little bit of rust here, whatever. But we're not saying, oh, this is definitely going to be replaced. It very, very well may have many years left on it. Yeah.
I think that leads to my question that I keep hitting mentally for everything you've been saying, like electric, heating, et cetera, as we go forward, at what point is it does need replaced versus, hey, we can keep this or repair or do a modification for so many of these different systems, because like,
Sure.
it can be fantastic, but.
So part of the problem is, we're running out of old guys that know how to service this kind of boiler, right? You're gonna have a harder time finding somebody that will actually be able to service an older unit like this. But not always. I mean, we're gonna talk about windows too. Same thing for the cool wooden windows with the rope sashes and little pulleys and springs. I mean, we find windows like that in homes that are in perfect condition because there are these craftsmen out there that still know how to maintain those for you and fix them for you. So that's really a hard question to answer because until it's dead, you know, it just doesn't make sense to fix it because it costs too much. You know, maybe it's still something, and again, with old houses, sometimes you like that character piece of it, right? Even though it's a boiler, you might like something about it that is that older piece. But yes, we don't see these often. But we'll see replacements, modern boilers for them. And, as long as the rest of the piping is decent, you're just replacing the boiler, not necessarily the whole heating system.
And what did you say was the average lifespan of a boiler?
A boiler could go around 50 years. Yeah.
So
Not always, but.
it's baseboard water lines or radiators.
Yeah, it's it's a more modern radiator, but this is what was providing, there's probably radiators in this house, right? This is what was providing the heat for the radiators in the house, so that water just circulates through. More modern boilers, right, and modern systems are the baseboard pipes going through. If you ever open up the cover for that, you'll see the pipes going through, have all these little fins attached to them, that's so it can radiate the heat out better.
How long do like modern day boilers last?
Again, probably at least 30 years or so, but things aren't built as well as they used to be, but we still see, lots of good boilers from the 80s and 90s that are still functioning very well.
What's the pro to keeping a boiling system versus just putting a furnace in? Is it just because that's how the house is?
Sure. So, first of all, it's pretty efficient. It's
Okay.
a pretty efficient method of heating a home. It doesn't dry your house out, right? A forced air furnace, that's why your hair is so dry in the winter. It's already dry here in Colorado, and then you got that hot air blowing through your house, so it really dries things out. So some people really prefer this kind of heating. The question that you just asked is if you have baseboard heating and you want to switch to a furnace, you have a really big expense ahead of you because you don't have any ducts, right? You just have export heat. And we also talked about in our last one that if you don't have ducts, it's hard to put in air conditioning. So a lot of baseboard heat homes have evaporative coolers to cool them, or sometimes they'll get a split system in to cool some areas. So it's a great source of heat, but it can have its challenges when you don't have ducts. If you want to switch over to a different system, it can be very, very expensive. You ready? Yes.
This is not a question.
Yes.
If it's a pretty old house, because I grew up in a house 1910, maybe older, but it ran off of coal,
Right.
and we would have coal delivered
Yeah.
and poured through a chute into the room next to it. At some point, they've been converted to gas, I imagine.
It's kind of crazy, some of the things, this is not an inspection we found, but at my wife's grandparents' house, which was like a 1920s house, coal furnace, that he had personally changed over to gas. So it was a kind of a potbelly thing that you used to throw coal into, now had gas going through. It's super inefficient, probably not really safe. But at least they had gotten gas to the house, right, to do that. But yeah, you will see all kinds of interesting conversions.
So the coal makes the steam, right? Is that?
If it was a boiler situation, yes, the coal would make the steam, or you might be feeding it into some sort of coal furnace. This is an octopus furnace. I don't know what the heat source on this is now, but it's the original furnace. Now, the interesting thing about this is it's not forced air. It's gravity. So if you go into some of these old houses, you'll see a heat vent, and then you'll see like really big return vents in the floor as well. So what does hot air do? Rises. What does cold air do?
sings, right? So there's no active blower. It's just heats up, right? And the hot air goes out here, and the cold air comes from these vents and falls back in to the bottom of it and just circulates. So we're just heating it, and we're just depending on science to circulate the air. Obviously not as efficient at actually warming your home. That's why we don't see them anymore, but here's one that we ran into it at some point before I was on board. I've never seen one in person. Let's talk about obsolete plumbing. So the biggest concern as far as health is obviously lead in your water, right? We hear a lot about that. We still run into some lead in homes. There are a couple of sources of lead in homes. I told you I was a principal, and I got to experience this kind of firsthand. Certainly our water main in our 1970s building did not have a lead main coming in, but lead can be in a lot of other things. There's lead in solder, in older solder, the stuff that you use to put the pipes together. There's lead that can get leached out of old brass fittings on all kinds of fixtures. So Jeffco, like 10 years ago now, maybe not quite that long ago, embarked on a kind of an EPA-led program where they tested every faucet in every school, at least every school that maybe was older, right? And there were several faucets within my building that came back high for lead. And the reason is, it could be a lot of things. It could be the fixture itself. It's just an old fixture that has some brass in it, that has lead in it, that leaches into the water. It could be something further down the pipes that we have to work on. So lead in water can be really complex as far as fixing it. Generally what we tell people to do is mitigate whatever water you'll be drinking, right? Put a filter on whichever you'll be drinking. That's your best bet, because if you put a whole house filter in, but what does a whole house filter do? It's right at the main, right? It's at the water coming into the house. Okay, so let's say it takes any lead out that's coming from old cities, right? What about once it gets past that? You might have fixtures and stuff in the house that are still adding lead to it. So it becomes kind of complex. So lead for bathing and in your toilet isn't going to do anything to you, but lead that you ingest can be an issue. So lead can be a little hard to deal with in older homes and actually mitigating it. And we're going to talk more about all this in detail, but like I said, lead can just be in the fixtures, not necessarily in the main. Galvanized piping, right? Steel piping, it basically looks like gas piping going through your house. We used to install that, and it unfortunately corrodes pretty easily, and it does it from the inside, right, where the water is. So it just continues to constrict until basically you don't have very good water flow at all.
There's no way to like
Clean it out. No, because really, remember what's doing is it corrodes, it's breaking it down too, so eventually it starts to leak and all kinds of things. So
It corrodes the pipe.
the pipe. Yep, we're going to see some pictures of that. So the galvanized piping, this one does have sort of a start and a beginning and an end. Was used pretty popularly from the 20s to the 50s. So when you're looking at homes of that age, you're going to see some galvanized piping pretty frequently. Again, it's sort of like the electrical that we might see it and be like, it goes through that wall, so I'm not sure what it does over there. Sometimes it's obvious that it's just still hanging there in the crawl space and it's been abandoned, it's not being used. Copper or PEX has been installed, but we still call it out just in case there's still some use of the galvanized piping for parts of the home. But hopefully we're seeing replacement piping when we see galvanized. Again, corrodes from the inside out, actually sort of, that's actually not a great picture, it's sort of from the inside in. So it's inside the pipe and it just kind of keeps corroding towards the end. Functional life is about 40 to 50 years. So again, if you're in the 50s and you still got galvanized piping, it's starting to really get bad at this point. You're about 70-some years old at this point. So that's galvanized piping. You typically do see some rust sometimes on the outside, but all of this is galvanized piping. Now, what's that? That looks a lot like PEX to me, which is newer plastic piping. So they may have already bypassed this and replaced it, but we don't know that for sure without really digging into the plumbing. But it looks like they might have actually done some
replacement already. Really has a tendency to corrode. I'll be honest with you, it's been a long time since I did the chemistry piece of my science when I was a teacher. But a big problem when you attach galvanized steel to copper is it actually increases the corrosion. There's some electrical situation that goes there, so then you get this what we call galvanization on the outside, where we start getting this corrosion on dissimilar pipes doing that. So you can see that it really causes some major issues. This is a water main coming in. It's got that galvanization going on. Lead in water. So we talked about this a little bit. It's difficult to identify exactly where it's coming from. It could be upstream of the main valve, so we could have lead in the pipes that are in the house as well as the fixtures. Lead mains, anything before 1930 probably had a lead main. Denver will tell you that, they've replaced all those. And that's a lot of pipe, right? It's a lot of pipe in Denver to be able to guarantee something that's underground as to whether it's all been changed out. So
Is that something that they'll tell you in the sewer scope?
not in the sewer scope. Hopefully not the sewer scope, because hopefully your water coming in is different than your water coming out.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not making fun of it, I'm just saying that we do see lead pipes in drain lines as well, and we'll have some pictures of those. Generally, that's not as big a deal because it's water that's leaving the house.
Right.
And we'll show you kind of some tip-offs that there's lead lines because of the way they connect. But we do see quite a bit of lead on drain pipes as well, lead connections. But what we can do is we do offer a water quality test. So we have a water quality test that does several metals, including lead. It does several other pieces of chemistry, nitrates, and then it also does biological bacteria and such. So it's got about 12 or so characteristics that it measures, including pH. Sometimes you'll find if you look this up online, we've been seeing a lot of higher pH water in Denver, every time we measure it almost. If you go back and read, Denver actually purposely upped the pH, that's kind of the acidity and the alkalinity of the water, and they did that because guess what? If it's a little bit higher pH, it doesn't leach lead out of things as much. So they've done that to try to deal with some of the lead that might still be left over in homes, is that when it's a little bit higher pH, it doesn't tend to draw the lead out of the piping and the fixtures. So there's some articles on that. It took me a little while to figure it out. I'm like, why all of a sudden this is going on? Looked it up, sure enough, there's an article about it and why they hired the pH. Put the pH up a little bit. So it comes out as a red flag on ours, but the funny thing is, they sell alkaline water, right? If you go through the store now, there's water that's alkaline because supposedly it's better for you.
They had baking soda too.
So, yeah, there you go.
So
So it's kind of interesting. So it comes back as a issue that it's not in the norm for our water, according to our lab and the EPA, and yet Denver's purposely doing it to try to help reduce the amount of lead that might be in the water. It's very interesting. All right. So here's an indication of lead. So anywhere there's lead piping, this is our lead main coming in to our main shutoff, where at the connection points, there's always this little bulb. And I don't know exactly how they do that, what the mechanics of that is, but at every connection point for lead piping, you're gonna see this little bulb, whether it's a drain or a water supply line. You're going to see that. So when we go in a crawl space and we see a line, first of all, that's kind of thin, copper, they make flexible copper, but if it's all kind of corroded like that, and there's dirt on it and such, we really can't tell for sure what it is. So we'll often just take out our screwdriver or a knife, just try to scrape that corrosion off the top and see whether we see a copper color or a lead color, a dull color like that. But if we see these bulbs, we know it's lead. We know it's lead right out of the gate. So we're always looking for it. We do find lead occasionally, not too frequently as far as the main lines going into homes. Occasionally. And you'll, like I said, you'll see that bulb, whether it's a, oops, I jumped too far there. So implications, let me make sure I didn't go too far, yeah. Implications of lead, we really are worried about the health of people, right? It's not good for you, it's not good for your brain. We definitely don't want to be ingesting a lot of lead. There's lead everywhere. But there are certain levels that we want to stay underneath, and then our water quality test has all that information. In practical terms, it is difficult to deal with and may require mitigation that, you know, is at the source that you're actually gonna be drinking from. Bottled water is always a good option. The same teacher that I told you about my, with the water heater, that moved to Texas, she and her husband moved back recently, inherited a home from, I think it was his parents that had passed. But it's in, like I said, North Cherry Creek, a very old home. And I was doing the inspection for them just to help them. They were trying to decide whether they wanted to buy out the other siblings and actually buy the house and live there and such. And so my water bottle was empty and I filled it up in the kitchen sink and she's like, "Don't drink that!" I'm going, "My damn blade, I don't think this one little drink of water is gonna kill me." Or then later on, I'm like, "Oh, something's wrong." She had a Brita filter all ready to go for me. But yeah, drinking water is an issue. You know, we definitely want to mitigate it if we have lead in it. All right. So most old homes are going to have some old systems in it, or they might just have the remains of it. That's what we're supposed to figure out, or what somebody even with more expertise is supposed to figure out, is how much of this has really been replaced. Or the other thing that we always ask for is, hey, get some more, if there's documentation, get that from the owner, right? Do they have documentation that this has been completely fixed, you know, whether it's from a plumber or contractor, that something has been completely changed out. Might still not trust that, but they might have something that tells you about that. You don't necessarily have to be replaced like those old boilers, but frequently it's time. And on the other hand, some things are acceptable for the seller, but they might not be acceptable for the buyer. Imagine that. Energy efficiency, I think this is our, I don't know if this is our last one or not, but, so older homes might have a lot less insulation. I can't tell you how many 1960s homes I get up in the attic and has the original insulation, and it's like that much rock wool kind of. And I was like, ooh, you know, some new insulation wouldn't be super expensive, and it would definitely do you well. And old windows are very much related to that as well. But we're going to talk about why would you keep that. So insulation, very, very frequently in the basement, the crawl space, in the attic, are not up to snuff and need some upgrading. Many old homes also have windows that aren't efficient at all. They're single pane. Now that goes even back just to like the 70s. You'll find single pane that aren't attractive, right? They're just kind of aluminum frames around them, and they're not very attractive at all. But they still have their old single pane windows in them. See that a lot in 40s and 50s homes as well. Some of those casement windows, original ones that have the metal frames but haven't been updated. New windows, even if they're not super expensive ones, well, they're all super expensive, but there's expensive and there's super expensive ply windows. Still are much more energy efficient than old windows, right? So old windows, there's a couple of things going on here. So this is the actual window, right? Single pane, often kind of breaking down, frequently don't open because somebody's just painted it shut because they are trying to keep as much energy in as possible. This one actually has a storm window installed as well, so another kind of single pane. Just at a later time on the outside, maybe you've seen storm windows installed on some older windows. I had a 1971 home, didn't have old wooden windows like this, but single pane, and then they had installed another layer of storm windows. So anytime you wanted to open the window, you'd have to open one set and then open the storm window as well. A little more energy efficient, still not the best fix. So a lot of heat loss happens two different ways. Convection is actually the air moving in and out, right? Convection is the actual loss of hot air out or cold air into the home. Conduction is when it travels through something, right? So the heat actually is going through the window to the single pane. That's why the double pane is better, because it tries to get through this pane, but then there's also an air barrier, so it does not able to conduct as well. So two different kinds of ways, actually losing the air that's already hot, but just losing the heat through materials that conduct the heat through it easily. An old home, the biggest savings and the least amount of cost is for the convection. So sealing it up, right? What can I do to seal up gaps and caulk things, better doors, better windows, but more expensive windows, that would be the conduction. But just trying to seal up anything that's actually leaking. And you can get an energy audit where they actually come and pressurize your house, and so then they can scanners to see where the most air is escaping from and try to seal those up. So again, it's more about caulking, weather stripping and such to try to get things sealed up so we're not losing the air. That's an easier one to fix. Trying to put in more insulation into a wall and such can be more expensive, and that would be that conduction heat. Oh, there it is, the energy audit. I'm kind of ahead of myself. So again, that energy audit would be helping kind of prioritize what's the best way I can do this the most cost effectively and get some energy savings. You know, the sad thing about energy savings is that it always costs you more up front, right, to try to do those things. Like you're going to spend $20,000 on solar. Hopefully you can get some rebates and such to bring that down. But that's a lot of money up front to save money over a long time, right? So in the long run, you might be saving money, but it takes some extra money up front for some of these kind of items to be able to really cut down on energy loss. So older homes tend to lose a lot, whether it's from insulation or just sealing things up, and it can cost quite a bit of money to get those savings, let it be over time. All right, so now we're going to talk about asbestos and lead, but not lead in the water, lead in paint, which again I experienced at school as well. We'll talk about that. So asbestos is it's a great product as far as being non-flammable. It's a terrible product as far as it being very bad to breathe in. And you've seen all the commercials for people that have been affected by mesothelioma, I don't know how to say. But you know, basically it's a lung cancer, a lung disease from breathing in asbestos. As long as it's encapsulated, it's okay, right? So I've been in all kinds of schools, older schools. We don't worry about asbestos until we decide to do construction, right? Then you got to test everything and get it abated before you start construction. There's asbestos in a lot of older homes. It frequently looks like this. When it's obvious that this is almost likely, very likely asbestos, insulation, white colored, wrapped around things, almost always asbestos, but it can really hide itself in all kinds of other things. Lots of tiles, old popcorn ceilings often have asbestos in it. You were talking about plaster that fortunately didn't have any in it, but it certainly could, depending on who made it and when they made it. So that's an important thing to check whenever you're going to dig into a home that especially has older materials in it. Lead-based paint, kind of the same thing. I'm just going to paint over this and I'm not going to worry about it. When we start to worry about it is, again, paint, especially in older homes, kind of starts to chip in your windows and your baseboards. And the only way this lead hurts you is if you eat it, right? You actually ingest it. Well, I don't think any people in this room getting to know you over the last couple of hours are eating paint, all right? But your kids might do it and your pets might do it. So that's the problem with that, is that when it starts to chip and such, then it can become a problem. So again, if you're going to tear out stuff and all, it's not as big of a problem as asbestos, but you want to make sure you do some really good cleaning. We don't have any old paint chips laying around. Schools with old metal equipment that painted over the years, there's almost always a few layers under there that have some lead-based paint. So what's the solution? Well, you could get rid of the equipment, or you could just keep it well painted with non-lead-based paint so that it's buried under there and not going to be. And most kids aren't out there chewing on the equipment, but occasionally they will. Testing is really kind of interesting. We don't do it, but if you've ever experienced it, it's an interesting process. These guys that do it, they have this super expensive radioactive gun, basically. What do we use lead for in medical profession? Right, you go to the dentist and they're going to say, don't leave without your certificate. And you leave. Hang on a second, let me sign this real quick.
Sorry.
You're okay. Promise me, but I'm going to make it before you leave, actually. All right. We're almost done. We're last couple of slides. All right, would you put your name right there in between those two? Perfect. So they come with this really expensive gun, right? When you go and you get an x-ray, what do? They drape you with lead, right? So lead, that's yours.
Oh, okay.
Lead
blocks radiation, right? So they have these special little radioactive guns that they put some radiation on, and they can tell based on how it reflects back or not, if there's lead in the wall. And they have to do that, right? So if I were a lead-based paint guy, I'd be here, I'm doing the inspection, but the lead-based paint guy's here, and he's like, every trim piece, every windowsill, he's checking it to see if he can find lead-based paint. So it's a little more expensive, right? Costs several $100 to have somebody come in and do that again, depending on the size of
What about asbestos testing? Is that like pretty invasive, bunch of holes?
It depends on what you're doing. So for example, if you just wanted to know some of the insulation, you're just taking one sample, it's not super expensive. You can do it yourself and send it to a lab, or you can hire somebody to come and do it. If you hire somebody, they have to have a special credential, and we don't have those, so we always refer that out. We used to do them, but now they require that credential. So it depends on what you're testing. Yeah, if you're gonna do some major remodeling, it's gonna be more if you have more samples you need to take. I know I'm gonna disturb the ceiling, I know I'm gonna take this wall down, so yeah, you have to sample more places.
And that's sampling, it's like making a hole and going to go grab something from the
Yeah,
wall?
you basically just need to get a piece of the material. Hopefully, you can try doing it in a less conspicuous spot. Like right here where this is already chunked out, you can just dig a little chunk out of there, put it in the bag, take it to the lab for asbestos testing, yeah.
I saw those holes?
Well, no, not necessarily. But that's how you would sample. You'd have to take little, and you try to take them from, like I said, inconspicuous spots, but you want to take them on any surface that you were going to destroy, right? So you're not breathing it in. Yeah. It's the same thing for eaves, stucco. Very invasive, actually. So eave stucco is this kind of bad stucco that's got like foam insulation behind it. It tends to get moisture behind it, tends to get mold behind it. And the way to sample to find out is basically to core out a bunch of little holes all over the outside of your house. Yes, you want to get those repaired, but it's invasive if you want to try to find out if your eaves is bad or not.
Because if they do have to replace it, they're essentially gonna rip through those holes, and it's not gonna matter, but like, if you don't need the problem
Then you kinda
fixed,
wanna
then
get it wrong.
you just gotta patch your own.
Or well, people, you can hire people to do it, obviously.
So that's stucco you're supposed to
Yeah,
with certain years?
there's, no, in fact, there's some newer ones, newer models that supposedly are better. But basically, if your stucco feels kind of hollow behind it, and it's kind of has some give to it, it's most likely eaves, which is the back kind, as opposed to what's called hard coat. Yeah. All right. Testing, lead-based sanding, we just talked about how you do that. So these are environmental issues that aren't generally a problem until you expose them to the outside. Okay. Let's just talk about a few other things about homes really quickly. So some of the things that you'll see in homes is plaster kind of moving and bulging. This is what plaster looks like from behind. It's just kind of skimmed onto a lattice. Gypsum is a newer kind of that we see used a lot, and then drywall is a more modern application. Cosmetic issues with old wooden floors, but some people like it, right? Some people think this is cosmetically kind of character, right? There's one of those big dents I was talking about that you would have. Problem is you can only sand your floors so much before the nails start showing through. That's because it's a tongue and groove situation, so the nails are going through here. So once you get through the top groove down to the tongue, you're out of luck. You can't really use those same floors anymore. If you decide to tear these floors out, however, there might be a guy somewhere that really wants that wood. Again, if you watch HGTV, they go to all these places and have all these old pieces of wood that they refabricate to different uses, and seems like an interesting business. So it can be cosmetic issues. It can also become a problem though if you scrape it too much. Squeaky floors, very common, right? It's hard to fix. Sometimes people again like it because it kind of gives character to the home, but if it's really bad, it might be annoying. If you can get into the structure underneath, sometimes you can deal with it with some shims and such. But if it's
Yeah, you could put a little shim in
Yeah.
there.
if it's between two finished spaces though, then it's kind of harder to deal with unless you've got the flooring pulled off and you can get the flooring guy to do a little bit with it while he's got it pulled apart. So it can be hard to deal with, but again, it's usually not a structural issue.
Sagging floors might be a structural issue. A little bit of that is pretty normal in super old homes where things have shifted a little bit. Things aren't quite level, but it's not all normal. That's not normal. So, yeah, we got a lot going on here. There's a lot going on here. So wooden beams that are going into the brick foundation. The brick has fallen apart. A good mason can shore this back up. No one's done that yet. We've even got galvanized piping. Somebody stuck in a temporary metal post trying to hold up the situation, but it really needs to be dealt with. Just a few fun old pictures here. Here's the cracking in the brick that you're talking about. Anytime we see cracking the brick to this significance, there's almost always one thing in common. Do you know what it is?
Water.
Yeah. Span downspouts, clogged downspouts, not necessarily having an extender on there. They probably never had an extender on there till all this happened. Clogged gutters, whatever. It's almost always water related. This is a home. I went with Scott. We were out and about and dropping a radon test off, and I just started taking pictures of some structural issues that were going on at the house. Old houses frequently have very old neglected garages. And they're even using the same temporary post trying to hold up the garage that's falling down. So lots of things are cosmetic and don't necessarily cost a lot to fix, or can, everything costs a lot nowadays. I don't even want to say that, right? Everything costs a lot, but in relative perspective, some things are cosmetic and you might like them. Other things might not cost too much to fix, and other things cost a lot. That's it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you guys for coming. What time is it? I can't get too long. I get to talking and you guys start answering asking questions.
We'll send you that.
All right, I didn't get these done yet. Let me do this real quick.